Good evening. And thank you for coming. It's been a crazy week, as you've probably noticed. When a week before the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States, I invited Professor Serhii Plokhii to return for his 5th presentation at Wellesley in the past dozen years. I asked him to talk about the looming nuclear dangers in the Russo-Ukrainian war, noting his recent book, Chernobyl, Roulette, which is a really gripping book. I didn't think to bring it with me, so I'm holding it up. I really recommend it. Chernobyl, Roulette, War in the Nuclear Disaster Zone. The topic is grim, and it seemed fitting that Professor Plokhii and I chose the date of March 5th, which is the anniversary of the happiest event in the history of the Soviet Union, the death of Stalin on March 5th, 1953, who was responsible for the deaths of millions of Ukrainians, just as Vladimir Putin has been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians in the past 3 years. We all know that with the U.S. President blaming Ukraine for the start of the war, calling President Zelensky a dictator, the disastrous blow-up in the White House last Friday, Trump's decisions to halt all military aid to Ukraine, and then just now even to halt sharing intelligence with Ukraine, and in all to side with President Putin in this calamitous war. I've asked Professor Plokhii to address where we are now in his presentation, and surely that will come out in the Q&A, which is likely to be very energetic. Serhii Plokhii is the Mykhailo Hrushevs'kyi Professor of Ukrainian History and the director of the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard. He's our country's leading authority on Ukraine and Eastern Europe, and he has published extensively also on the history of World War II and the Cold War. Actually, extensively is not the word. The man is staggeringly prolific. I calculate that the gestation period between each of his books is like about 18 to 24 months, closer to 18. And it's not just quantity. His books have won numerous awards, including the Lionel Gelber Prize for the Best English Language Book on International Relations and the Bailey Gifford Prize for Nonfiction. Delighted to welcome him back to Wellesley. Thank you, Professor Plokhii.
Thanks a lot, Professor Tomarkin, first of all for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be back, and also thanks a lot for this introduction. I will start with just general overview where we are in the war, and probably there will be a continuation of that in Q&A. And I'll talk about the nuclear threats and about my book. In the middle, that will be the core of my presentation, and there will be some images also to show. The illustrations that were done by Washington Post, one of them is used for poster. It's an absolutely fantastic poster. I mentioned to Professor Tomarkin that I normally don't collect my own posters, but when I saw that one, I thought, okay, I should not forget to ask for one. So I will be bringing back home that poster. So there will be some images as well. First of all, you can hear me or not? You can. Okay. That's already a plus. Now, my general introduction in terms of the war. The war is 11 years old, so it didn't start in 2022. It started in 2014. If you look at the stage of the all-out war that began in 2022, it's already 3 years old. And looking back at what happened in the war, there is a number of things that one would qualify as miracles, other would qualify as basically really unexpected setbacks. And the maybe not so unexpected setback, but certainly the biggest thing that led to the war was the all-out Russian invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, which was expected and unexpected at the same time, in a sense that the US and British intelligence were saying that, okay, it is coming, and people didn't want actually to believe what was already there, people in Ukraine and a good part of people in Russia as well. But then we have this war, and there are differences, very significant differences at that time between what the American administration thinks and how it looks at that, and that was administration of President Biden, and what is happening in Kremlin with Vladimir Putin, whose administration goes on now for 25 years. So differences on everything except one thing. They agree that Ukraine probably would not last for more than a couple of weeks. That's why the US embassies and every other Western embassy is withdrawn from Ukraine. The students are ordered to leave the country. The only embassy of a major country that does nothing is China. And they're doing nothing because they actually also believe in what Washington and Moscow believes at that time, that Ukraine would actually fall, maybe not in the week. The Chinese maybe think it would happen within the days. So no need really for that commotion to try to remove your students or remove your embassy. And then a few weeks into the war, the Chinese actually are trying to get their students out of the country. Ukraine survived the first 2 or 3 days, and it survived the first 2 weeks, and no one expected it actually being able to resist for months and for years. So that was first unexpected by many development in that war. Another thing that was unexpected was that Ukraine, the country without navy, would really pretty much defeat the Russian navy in the Black Sea, push it into the western part of the sea, away from the Crimea, which was the main base. It would be unreasonable to expect anything of that sort happening, but that's what happened. Another thing that no one expected was actually that the Ukrainian armed forces would cross the border with the Russian Federation, park in the Kursk region, and that it would be, until now, impossible to actually to move them outside of the territory of the Russian Federation. Most of the territory that were taken by the Russian army in the first weeks of the war, of the big war, was liberated by the Ukrainian armed forces. Again, one more absolutely unexpected thing. Now, what, in terms of unexpected setbacks, is basically what is happening now and in front of our eyes. So one of the key supporters of Ukraine, the United States of America, decided actually to stop supporting Ukraine at this point. And is in negotiations with Russia. We don't know what the outcome would be, but from what we have in the public sphere is that it will be probably a ceasefire basically on the Russian terms. Maybe not. Miracles do happen in this war. We know they happened before. So the hope is there, but that's the other sides. And all of those miracles, not all of them, but good part of the miracles before that, were achieved in Ukraine because of the support of the United States of America and because of European support and solidarity. Political, but also economic and military. So that US support is essential for any potential miracle that would happen. It depends very much on whether the US continues to stand by Ukraine or not. We don't know what will happen, but we are probably in the most dangerous moment in the history of this all-out war since February of 2022. Now, the story that I'm telling in my book, the title is Chernobyl Roulette, is the story of the first few weeks of the war. So that's about that first miracle of how Ukraine didn't fall. It is the story of people who actually were under the Russian occupation since the very first day of the war, the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. But I will tell you about their story, and it will provide, or at least it provided for me, the explanation of why everyone was wrong expecting Ukraine to fall within the first few days or within a few weeks. So that will be one theme. Another theme will be about the danger of the nuclear industry in the conditions of the war. Because Chernobyl is what here in the United States in the early 1950s was presented, packaged, and sold to the society both in the US and abroad as atoms for peace, which are good atoms. Bad atoms are Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These are good atoms. So what we see now happening in Ukraine, the quote-unquote good atoms actually turning into bad atoms, because atoms are atoms, and radiation, whether it is produced by the nuclear bomb or produced by the nuclear site, which is in danger, has basically the same impact on human bodies and on environment as a whole. So that story of atoms for peace turning into atoms for war, that's another story that, again, like many things about this war, go beyond just the place where it is happening and have broad international impact. So I will start with just telling you first what happened. Then I will tell you about how I was writing the book. And it was very different from most of my books. I'm a historian, trained historian. Here I was writing about something that was happening almost in front of my eyes. I will talk about things that didn't change in terms of the particular culture and behavior since the time of Chernobyl 1986, and things that did change. And things that didn't change would mostly be associated with the way how the occupying army, the Russian army, behaved itself on the territory of the nuclear site, and things that did change compared to 1986 in terms of the culture and perception and how society functions in response would be mostly related to what happened on the Ukrainian side. And then I'll conclude with talking about the international impact of that story for many things, including our hopes for climate change, which are very much dependent on the revival of nuclear energy. So what you see there is the Russian tank two Russian servicemen approaching one of the main buildings of the nuclear power plant. So they ended up there during the first day of the war, because what happened was expected and unexpected at the same time, the way how the entire war was expected and unexpected. First of all, the war had some rhymes with the way how the Germans' war on France was started in the 20th century, in the sense that you get into the into the neutral state and then you attack through the neutral state, for Belgium or through other places. In this case, it was Belarus. So the Russian army moves into Belarus allegedly for maneuvers, for the military exercises, and then crosses the border and attacks Ukraine from the north. This is the closest way to Kyiv, the capital of the country. The plan, on the Russian side, the whole thing is called and is still called the Special Military Operation. This is not given that name is the idea that, okay, we are going to have a war, but we call it a special military operation to confuse somebody. That's how it was planned. That's how it was envisioned. And the idea was to get to the capital as soon as possible, to either arrest the government of Volodymyr Zelensky or maybe kill Zelensky himself or force him to sign a particular sort of agreement. And the closest way to get to Kyiv was through Belarusian territory, and the closest way to get to the Belarusian territory was through the Chernobyl nuclear exclusion zone. So that's the way how the Russian troops entered the Chernobyl exclusion zone from two directions. They passed it. They were moving toward the Kyiv, and Chernobyl nuclear power plant was in their rear. So this is the Chernobyl exclusion zone for you to, you saw it on the previous map to get some idea, because generally the imagination for anyone who knows anything about Chernobyl or watched Chernobyl HBO miniseries is that this is a 30-kilometer exclusion zone. That's how it was. The first 10-kilometer zone and then 30-kilometer zone, that was the way how it was defined within the first days in April 1986 after the Chernobyl disaster. People didn't know where the radiation went, where the winds were blowing, where the rain was happening, and so on and so forth. And then over time, they extended, so now the so-called 30-kilometer zone is not 30-kilometer, and it's not so. So, and as you see against the background of contamination that is still there, even this zone is quite, the borders were drawn quite arbitrarily. But, so in this zone there are areas that are actually probably as clean or as dirty as place here in Boston. But then there are other areas which are very, very contaminated. And it's not good for your health, really, spending too much there. It's a terrible idea if you decide to go there on a tank. The first thing that happened, and radiation information is directly delivered to the headquarters of the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, was that the radiation level went up. The tanks and heavy equipment was moving. The radiation was the dirt, the dust was coming up, and of course people who are there are inhaling all of that. So it's bad idea. Now the task of taking control over the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was given mostly to the units of the Rosgvardia, of the Russian internal forces. Many of them trained as a riot police. Many of them arrived to Chernobyl with actually shields and were saying that we're on the way to Kiev to control the crowds, to bring your president out, to make him to sign something, and then we are out of here. So basically, you see riot police that is put in charge of the operation. They get a number of tanks, and they get also a special unit who are trained in the way how to take over nuclear power plants. And irony is that that unit was actually training how to take over nuclear power plant at the Kursk nuclear power station, which is now relatively close to the front line in Kursk region. So this is the person who was in charge of the operation, General Burakov, whose name you basically probably would not find in the news. He preferred to stay incognito mostly, and then this is the colonel who became both Burakov and Colonel, name is in the book, it escapes me right now, but they were awarded the Hero of Russia, allegedly for saving the world from another Chernobyl disaster. But Burakov is never mentioned anywhere, and the colonel was on the news, a big hero. It's difficult for me to say why Colonel got all the attention, but that's how it happened. And Burakov was actually a representative of the Central Command of the Rosgvardia in Moscow, so maybe they were trying to shield senior commanders and put someone in charge. I don't know what happened, but that's basically what happened in Chernobyl. And the next stop for a different group of Russian army was the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, 6 reactors. It's located in southern Ukraine. So what happened in Chernobyl was when the tank moved toward the headquarters of the nuclear power plant, the Ukrainian National Guard, it was a unit of somewhere around 150 to 200 people, who were there to really protect the station from quote-unquote terrorist attacks, stalkers, and so on and so forth. Like an armed unit, they decided that they actually couldn't and shouldn't fight that war, that battle, because that would endanger the station, that would endanger the radiation security of the region, so they laid down weapons. They were interned and then eventually would be taken as prisoners of war and shipped to Russia. So the similar unit, Ukrainian National Guard's unit, knowing what happened in Chernobyl, decided actually to fight back in Zaporizhzhia. And what you see here is actually a live streaming of the battle on the territory of the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. In real time, one of the engineers, Ukrainian engineers, connected the internal surveillance cameras on the territory of the nuclear power plant to the YouTube channel. And people were watching in real life what was happening. That was a few days after what happened in Chernobyl. So these things are interconnected. Eventually, after the battle, that missiles were fired. One of the buildings was on fire. The Russian unit that was moving in didn't have, of course, firefighters with them, but they would not allow the Ukrainian firefighters in for 3 or 4 hours. Eventually, the Ukrainians were allowed to get in and dealt with the fire. story of occupation of Chernobyl that is at the center. Maybe I'll move to something more kind of uplifting. This is the deputy mayor of the city of Enervodar, which is a city for Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. That's where the operators live. So marching after the occupation of the station and the city, and he would be eventually kidnapped and taken as prisoner by Russian army. That's the story. The story in Chernobyl ends in late March, so after a month and 1 week roughly after the occupation, when the Russian operation against Kiev collapsed. Ukrainians went on counteroffensive and Russian army withdrew. So the city was the city of Slavutich, where the workers lived, and they talk about that a little bit later. The station itself, they were liberated. And most of what is in my book comes from the interviews with the people who were under occupation. Some of them, again, journalists were taking that and publishing those interviews. Others, I got access to the material collected by the Reckoning Project. That's a project of Ukrainian journalists who were working together with the Ukrainian Attorney General or General Prosecutor's Office, collecting evidence on the crimes during the war, and they were interviewing people on the liberated territories, not just around Chernobyl, but also in other areas as well. So a bulk of what my book is based on is evidence coming from those people. My problem was like with every project, you want to have a more balanced, or at least a little bit balanced, the source base. And my problem was the sources from the Russian side. So what helped a lot was that the station was visited by the Russian TV crews on a number of occasions. So there was the TV footage that was available there. There was a celebration of this general and colonel who were the heroes of Russia, colonel in particular, so he was in TV shows, so there were interviews. And there was coverage also in the Russian media. So the sources are a little bit unbalanced, but that's, at least I was trying to do whatever I could in those circumstances to collect not just Ukrainian sources, but also Russian. Generally, it was quite an experience working on the history that sort of very fresh and evolves. For those of you who are majoring in history, taking history courses, write history papers, you know that it's good to go and to work in the archives. Okay, there are no archives there, which is certainly a problem in the way how we trained. If you write a history paper, you want to make an argument, and most of the argument would be related to the historiography that is already there. Okay, there is no historiography. You're walking really. You are the first person to enter that huge space, a huge desert or mountain range, whatever, and you're trying to orient yourself on your own. So all of that are challenges for people trained as historians who think that way, and there is lack of sources. I talked about that already. But there are also pluses that I discovered of working on the themes and topics that really are part of contemporary history. That huge plus comes with a thing called social media. We historians dream about the situation where we can get not just the archival materials from somewhere produced by the government body and government institution, but can get some sort of human voices as well. Those human voices come through memoirs written decades after that happened. If you're lucky, you get a diary. And diary, the description of the event would be done, I don't know, a couple of days later. Even if you come back home now and you were so much impressed by this lecture for good reasons or bad reasons, you liked it or you disliked it, and you decided to write it down. You're already doing that at the end of the day. You already heard the beginning of the lecture. You heard the end of the lecture, and you survived the Q&A. So your already opinion could change a number of times, and you create already a narrative about this day, good day, bad day, what was there. So the social media, as you know, you react immediately. So it captures your reaction right now, right in that moment. And that's what I found really fascinating, because again, as historians, we're working with early periods. We don't have those materials. I'll give you just one example. This is the image of the battle that has taken place on the territory of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. So there is an organization in Ukraine, like in every country, the nuclear energy regulator. And they are the guys who are in touch with Vienna, with international organizations, and so on and so forth. And they have their website where they put latest news. They also, you can leave your comment. So normal people don't go on that website. Normal, I mean people who are not really part of that industry. These are really highly educated engineers and scientists in the nuclear industry who share their insights or their opinions on this or that. And this battle is happening in real time. They are watching it. And suddenly you see the change that is in terms of the commentary that is there on that page. There is no any more advice on what to do or what not to do. These people ran out of, they're so terrified by what is happening there, that the discourse shifts from the engineering and scientific to actually religious discourse. Mother of God, protect us. They don't know what they're doing. And it goes probably for the entire period of how they're watching that and what their commentary, and a lot of that comes from the other nuclear science in Ukraine. If you would talk to those people at the end of the day, they would probably switch back to there, and they know that how it ended, that, okay, there was a fire, but eventually there was no explosion and it survived. They would probably switch back to their normal scientific perception of the world and thinking and vocabulary and so on and so forth, and probably would not even remember what they were saying at that moment. But it is there. It is captured, and again, that's a big plus. So let me now switch to. I described to you what actually happened in Chernobyl. Altogether 300 people, not just Ukrainian National Guard, but also the operators of the nuclear power plant. It is not functioning, but there is a huge sarcophagus over the reactor number 4 that exploded back in 1986. There are the facilities for the fuel from other reactors. The last of them was shut down in the year 2000, but it is still too hot. it is still being actually cooled in the pond. For it to be cooled, you need actually circulation of water. So pump is doing that. For pump to work, you need electricity, right? So if you don't have electricity, you are in the Fukushima type of a situation. That's where electricity was cut off and there would be meltdown of the reactors. If there is malfunctioning with this big new confinement sarcophagus, and a few weeks ago it was hit by a drone, you're in trouble again. The radiation gets out, so it's a dangerous nuclear site. Even by now, since '86, how many years will it have? 30, close to 40 years. It still needs a lot of attention, electricity, expertise. A lot of equipment is there. So all of that is taken over. Close to 300 Ukrainian now detainees, we can call them, are there. And there is Russian army that is present there. Why is the Russian army at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant? As I said, they're heading toward Kyiv, and they come. They take over the plant. They talk to this gentleman, Valentin Heiko, who is a 50-year-old, marked his 60th anniversary under occupation. Is the guy who is the foreman of that shift. So he is in charge. You look at him, he is kind of a classic computer geek. Very, very unimposing. This guy got, and that we're getting from all sources, from Russian sources, from Ukrainian sources, that guy got quite strength of his character. So the story begins when the Russian officers approach him and say, okay, we occupied the plant, and he says, okay, who are you? I'm here, so and so, I'm representative of Ukraine, what are you doing here? So they introduced themselves and said that they were there to protect the nuclear power plant from Banderites, which is a term for nationalists, comes from World War II. And Heiko says, do you have a criteria according to which you decide who is Banderite and who is not? They look at each other, they don't have an answer. He says, okay, you can start arresting from me. So, but the original pretext for the occupation is basically that we are here to protect, right? So the guys who are in charge of the operation get Hero of Russia for that. So that is the official narrative. What is really happening there is something that Heiko recognized right away and refused to play according to those rules. He started to work at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1987, immediately after the reaction. He had really a strong negative attitude towards Soviet military. He recognized the same attitude in the Russian one. So why he wasn't happy with the Soviet military? The 600,000 people were mobilized to deal with the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986. Most of them were mobilized through being actually called into the Soviet army. And they were used as bio robots. He had issues with the Soviet military commanders that were sending those people where the staff of the station would never go. And he would have the same discussions with the Russian commanders now, telling them, Okay, I don't know how you will sleep after that. You brought your boys here. You have to follow our rules, because if not, they will get irradiated. And what you see on the Russian side is probably the Soviet attitude that is multiplied. This by 2, maybe by 3, by 4. This is disregard for health and life, not only of the enemy, but also of your own soldiers. So the soldiers who end up at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, they don't know, they're not prepared at all. They don't know where they were going. They're not sure about their mission. The unit that was trained to take over the Chernobyl nuclear power plant at the Kursk station knows how to take over the nuclear power plant. They have no clue what this nuclear power plant is about, how it is different, non-functional, and the place of the former disaster, how it is different from there. So they're clueless in that regard. They are digging trenches. These are trenches near the Red Forest. When I was writing the book, I added to that it looks like they never watched the HBO miniseries. And my editor told me, okay, that's really not your style. It seems to me I removed that sentence. But this is one of the most dangerous places on the earth. You don't drop dead as a result of that, but as one Ukrainian official said about the Russian soldiers, they left Chernobyl, but the Chernobyl will never leave them. Again, we still don't know the way how the smaller doses. We know what happens when Hiroshima happens, when there is a bomb. A lot of radiation in a short period of time. We don't really know if you are exposed to the small levels of radiation for a long period of time, what will happen. We know the general tendency. People develop cancers and other things and have other issues, but we don't know the details. And one thing that was part of this war, which was not part of the Soviet behavior in 1986, is basically looting. So everything was looted. This is one of the labs, European Union funded labs there. So why is looting? Actually, a good part, a big part of that, it's about drinking. The Ukrainian sources saying that probably 1/3 of the garbage produced by the army were empty bottles. And that's basically looting is very much the factor of this war, especially of the first few months. Now, when it's a sort of a trench war where there is very little movement one way or another, the area is almost destroyed. This is less of a factor, but that was a big factor at the time of Chernobyl, with a lot of stuff that was irradiated, that was packed into the cars when the Russian army was leaving, and then brought to Belarus and to other areas. So what we see is really, if you go just beyond this war and try to think about the way how the society functions, how the army behaves and functions, you see a very clear continuation between 1986 and 2022, 2023. Now, what we see on the Ukrainian side, there is a lot of change there. The first change comes with the fact of who are these people, who are those Ukrainians who are at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Majority of them probably ethnically are Ukrainians. The language that they speak to each other is Russian. Good part of those people are ethnic Russians, some of them with roots in Russia. the place where they live, the city of Slavutich, this is the last city built in Ukraine and maybe in the Soviet Union before collapse, before 1991. It's very international. There are different regions called after different republics and so on and so forth. So this is a very multi-ethnic composition of those people. And they, in this battle, one very interesting character who sort of go between the Ukrainians and the Russian occupying force. You listen to his language and you see elements of the Russian dialects from Volga region, because that's where he and his family comes from, and you see elements of the Ukrainian dialects from northern Ukraine. So he was sort of a perfect, even in linguistic terms, a perfect go-between, but he is just one of the examples. So, and these people in this war between much more powerful Russia and much weaker Ukraine, that people didn't believe that would survive for a long period of time, had chosen the side of Ukraine. They resisted in a number of ways. Some of them are actually funny. So the one that is not funny but worried the most was that they were really kidnapped, right? But they managed to turn the tables on the occupiers using the knowledge that they had of the processes of the plant itself. It comes from the Russian sources, but confirmed also by Ukrainian sources, that Heiko told the Russian commander, saying that, well, after listening to Putin's veiled threat of using nuclear weapons, he said, okay, if this is happening, you are not leaving this place. We have nothing to lose. I work here for, Heiko said, for whatever, 20, 30 years. I will find the way. It's basically the whole thing will explode. And the Russians who were not prepared, they didn't know what was going on. The colonel, whom I mentioned, again, the name in the book, on the Russian TV, answering the question, he believed that the reactors were still operating. He believed that reactors after 1986 were still operating. So they were using this a sort of blackmail to fight back. They used it also, I started in this more funny way, in a different way, when they would, two operators would pass a Russian soldier, and the operators would talk to each other in Russian and say, okay, do you still have those pills that we were given? And the other say, no, I ran out of that. I said, well, then we are screwed. And they pass, and the poor Russian soldier never heard about those pills and other things. So there was this actually way of resisting, and they found themselves in really uncharted waters. Let me see about my uncharted waters. Okay, I'll be wrapping up. So yes, the big question was of what is loyalty and what is betrayal under the circumstances. The attack on the nuclear power plant, this is something that we still, till now, we don't have protocols. No nuclear power plant, there are 440 stations all over the world, was built with the idea to be the place of the battle and survive the battle. There is not clear what the operators are supposed to do. It's not also clear till today in the international law, in the Ukrainian law, in any law, is this the right way to lay down your weapons, and then you are saving the plant, you are saving the environment, you are saving the world, or by laying down your weapons you are actually betraying your country. In Chernobyl they decided to lay down weapons. In Zaporizhzhia they fought back. So those people were really deciding on their own what is right, what is wrong, what they were supposed to do, what they were not supposed to do, and they were pretty much on their own. They were cut off from from the place where they lived. They were cut off from Vienna. And they were coming up with their own answer. So for Heiko, the betrayal was the one guy who actually left the nuclear power plant and at huge risk for himself, marched through the war zone for approximately 60, 80 kilometers to join his family. So for Heiko, he was in betrayal because he betrayed the group. The group was there to protect the nuclear power plant, and that was loyalty. At the end, Heiko and others, after the liberation, they got state awards from Ukrainian state, but again, sort of proving that what they were doing was the right thing to do. But still, it's basically a huge gray zone. The huge gray zone is also what is happening today with the nuclear energy in the world in the conditions of the war. When I researched the book, I was absolutely shocked when I realized that there is no, in terms of the international law, there is no even actually good convention that would actually specify what is right and what is wrong under the circumstances. The Ukrainian side accuses the Russian side of the nuclear terrorism, and you can indeed make a case of that sort, which was, again, waging war. It's more than terrorism. But there is also in the most important document comes, it's from 1979, and it's the addendum to the Geneva Protocol on the civilians in the war zones. And the nuclear power plants are treated there together with the hydroelectric power stations, dikes, and other things. So there is not even a separate entity for that. This is Rafael Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, who got a lot of criticism for being really unable to do anything. Here he is visiting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after a drone hit one of the facilities there. And the problem is that Grossi has no even mandate in his organization to deal with the conditions of the war. It's completely unprepared. For the first 2 to 3 weeks, Grossi and his organization would never mention word Russia in its statements. The statements would go immediately after the occupation of Chernobyl on a daily basis. But like any other UN organization or UN-based organization, the idea is that you can't really offend the members of your organization. So then I went to other statements of other organizations and other conditions. Well, Russia is the member of the Security Council. Russia is one of the contributors to the International Atomic Energy Agency. The paycheck of people who work there depends on whether Russia makes its contribution or not. So the UN-based agency has no mandate, and politically is incapable to deal in the situations where one of the members of the Security Council is in. And here Rafael Grossi looks into this abyss, but it looks, I had chosen this picture because this is an image of us all, of the entire world. No one said that the war in Ukraine, the Russo-Ukrainian war, is the biggest war in Europe since World War II, but no one said that this is the last war that the humankind is fighting. And there are 440 reactors. We are on the verge of expansion of the nuclear industry as a whole, and we don't have legal base, we don't have institutions, we don't have protocols. We're completely unprepared to deal and protect the reactors that we already have today. So this is one of the lessons of that war, but there are others as well, and I will be more than happy to address them in response to your questions, because it's always better to know what you're interested in rather than telling you what you are supposed to be interested in.
Thank you.
Well, that was chilling. And to make it even more chilling, we hadn't heard much about it, but there had been talk last year, maybe the year before, about Putin and other members of his cohort threatening the use of tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine in this war. And do you want to say anything about that? I mean, you're looking at hoping for a scenario, not hoping, predicting a scenario that there could be a ceasefire on Russia's terms. No, we're not hoping on Russia's terms, obviously. But let's say there's no ceasefire. Let's say that Russia is emboldened and instead gets much more aggressive against Ukraine. Could you talk a little bit about any risk, nuclear risk?
Yeah, the threat of the use of the nuclear weapons was, according to the US intelligence estimates, the highest in the fall of 2022. The assessment was 50-50. I talked to people in Ukraine on the very high level. They didn't believe that that was the case. So the story there was that the Russian front line started to fall. So the Ukrainians attacked in northern Ukraine near Kharkiv, surprise attack. So the Russians got caught in Kherson on the other side of Dnieper River. Problem moving there. So the war was on the verge of actually turning the other way around. So that's where, whether it was a real possibility or it was just a blackmail, nuclear blackmail, and that's when it was the highest. The US was in touch with Moscow. I understand that China was part of those negotiations as well. So whether it was a real threat or it was no real threat, but it was a blackmail, the reaction to the blackmail was basically not just on the American side or European side, but also on the Chinese side and Indian side. Don't do that.
Okay.
So there is a price to be paid for use of the nuclear weapons in terms of the international relations, and Russia relies on China in particular, but India as well, for purchasing oil and gas and for technological, smuggling technological things and so on and so forth. So the price is too high. So the real threat, nuclear threat, it is there. It is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in particular. And it is present today. In what way? First of all, if you decide to use nuclear power plant as basically a nuclear weapon, we don't know whose drone was here. They can be pointing fingers endlessly, like it was with the explosion of the Kakhovka dam, right? A major ecological disaster. When you shoot a nuclear missile, the world knows where it came from, the world knows where it landed. So all of that is known, you have to pay the price. If you want to turn the largest nuclear power plant into the dirty bomb, you can point at Ukrainians can point at Russians, and the debate, the discussion, so there is no one to pay price for that. So it's cheap. If you want to do that. Now, on the top of that, you don't need to actually go out of your way to create an accident. The accident at Chernobyl, at 3 Mile Island, at Fukushima didn't happen in the conditions of the war. Accidents do happen. You don't need to hit the nuclear power plant, you have to cut the electricity that comes to that place. And in Chernobyl, one of the chapters is the description exactly of that situation. So you don't have to plan that, it can happen on its own. And that's why I believe that whatever there was real danger or not real danger in the fall of 2022, but the danger associated with the nuclear power plants in the war zone is there, and probably it's growing with every passing day.
Thank you. So we're ready for questions from the audience. Questions, comments. Anna.
Hi there. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us at Wellesley today. I really appreciate it. I just have a question, I guess pertaining to what you were just discussing, and you saying like the UN doesn't really have control or jurisdiction here, and especially in terms of the IAEA, like that seems to be the main like body that's actually able to go in and kind of like try to regulate these power plants. And like you said, like I know there is the back and forth, like the pointing fingers, and so given that, but I also know there have been some like talks, like, so how do you think that, going forward with the threat of, the weaponization of nuclear power plants, how do you think that can be, resolved? Do you think that can be resolved diplomatically? I think over time, obviously in the long term, law might be something we want to implement, but how, given the gravity of it, like, what do you think?
Yeah, I actually very optimistic that in medium to, not in short term, but probably in the medium term, that there will be new legislation, new agreements, new conventions, and new protocols. Because every country that has nuclear weapons on its territory, nuclear energy facilities or its neighbors, they're interested in that. Ukrainians were very critical of IAEA and what was happening there and how toothless they were. But when Ukrainians started to move closer to the Kursk nuclear power plant, the Russians were using the very same language. Where is IAEA? Why they're not here? Why they don't do anything? So it's not just Ukraine, but already in this war now, you don't have to imagine that Russia is interested also in the protection of its nuclear power plants. So that every nuclear state with nuclear energy facilities is interested in that. So I hope that will be at some point achieved. In terms of what to do, there are different models, and again, what Ukraine has been proposing, and again, it was not invented by Ukraine, suggested earlier. Well, the nuclear power plants are and should be declared to be no war zones, no-fly zones, and again, they're not particularly helpful in some cases, and other they're helpful. There can be the peacekeepers that are there. Again, we have mixed record with peacekeepers. But again, that would be at least a step in the right direction, but for that you have to have a legal base, for that you have to have a general political agreement. But again, I think that it's the thing that in the interest really of everybody in the world.
Yeah, sorry, let me just quickly jump in to kind of switch gears here and talk about President Zelensky in the aftermath of the attack by Trump on him, on his country. So what is your assessment of how he, the president, has handled it, and your advice? If you were an advisor to President Zelensky, what would you be telling him now with everything that he's got to face, having been through this traumatic week?
Clearly what Zelensky refused to do, he refused to be silent. He was clearly talking back. The basis of this agreement, again, there are of course personalities and there are particular patterns of behavior that I'll not touch here because they're so obvious to everyone. But beyond that, there is a real differences in the positions, which became clear also in that fight in the Oval Office. Basically, President Trump's position is that let's sign ceasefire as soon as possible, and trust me, Putin will not attack as long as I'm the president, roughly, right? And a position of Ukraine and Zelensky saying, okay, we are all for peace, but we need some sort of a guarantee because this is already the second war that we are fighting. We know what is coming, and there is no agreement on that, right? So what is very clear is that it's not like Ukraine can't continue fighting without the United States, but that it would be extremely difficult. Europe is immediately after that disaster, really, both for the US and for Ukraine, that happened in the White House. The leaders started to tweet support for Ukraine, so Europe is on board still. But US is extremely important. So they are now moving back to the negotiation table. At this point they're talking about Tuesday signing that agreement. The optics of the agreement are awful. It's basically a neo-imperial move. Practically what that means, I don't think it actually means much beyond the really sort of public statement on the cooperation, so symbolic meaning of that agreement is much more important in my eyes than what is there, because it's basically a framework. Then there should be more specific agreements. There should be things that would be going through the parliament, probably through the Congress, and so on and so forth. So the importance of this agreement really is getting US and Ukraine on the one side, which is important.
Thank you. I bet King Charles regrets having invited Trump for a second state visit. You know, that happened on Thursday, the day before the Friday blow-up. Yeah, I bet he regrets it.
And then he had Zelensky visit him.
And then that's what he did instead. He had sent him.
Two days later.
Yeah. So, questions from the audience?
Identify yourself.
My name is Scott Schwartz. The map that you showed up there, it looks like Chernobyl is right on the border of Belarus. The Belarusian president, I have no idea his background, but wouldn't he have said, hey, look, I know a little about nuclear power, or I have some advisors. If you mess with that reactor, my country is destroyed. Putin, I know he's buddies with Putin, but Putin's in Moscow, okay? He's not going to, the radiation's not going to affect, but it's going to destroy my country. So what do you think his opinion was on the matter? Or he just didn't care?
Yeah, I would be very surprised if actually he was asked about his opinion. He is there basically. He was saved from his own people by Russian intervention, not military, but political and economic and otherwise. So he was stating again and again publicly that those were just maneuvers, nothing would come out, that he is not going to attack. So it's a bad story for him on many levels, not just the threat of Chernobyl, but potential destabilization of the situation in his own country. What if there is a Ukrainians decided to go not in Kursk, but in Gomel? I don't think that the Belarusian army is there. It would be either willing or capable of fighting back. So Yeah, this is at this point Belarus is a puppet state, so there is no question about that.
Other questions? I can just, okay. So Putin has, his vision is about reconstituting empire, right, beyond Ukraine and to other countries around. What do you what do you
Yeah,
think?
no, you'll have to repeat the question for the recording. So the question is, right, so what is Putin's vision? Is he really wants to recreate the empire?
Yeah, history rhymes, but it doesn't repeat itself. So when I hear that he wants the Soviet Union back, he wants the Russian Empire back, he wants parts of Russian Empire and parts of the Soviet Union back. So the Russian story, in my opinion, is basically a classic imperial, post-imperial story. There is a realization, like it was in Britain before, that empire in the way how it existed as the Soviet Union, is too expensive thing to support on a particular level. The Central Asian republics and others, and so on and so forth. So the idea is that it's basically neo-colonialism. You control it in indirect way, and leave the local governments to deal with the paying pensions and doing all these other things, right? But there is an exception, and exception is Ukraine and Belarus, where Putin brings back the Russian imperial model of Russian nation as consisting of Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians. So the war started under the banner Russians and Ukrainians were one and the same, which didn't mean that Russians were Ukrainians. It meant that Ukrainians didn't exist. So that's basically, on the one hand, you have this post-imperial way of looking at Central Asia, potentially Baltics and other places, and very imperial understanding of what Russians are or supposed to be. You have elements of both. And then in terms of the Soviet Union, Putin is very unhappy with Lenin, and to a degree with Stalin as well, and their crime is that they recognized Ukrainians as a separate nation. Not out of their own volition, but because they had to pull back empire after the revolution and civil war, and then had to make concessions. And for Putin, this is anathema. So he wants back the Soviet Union importance on the international arena, presence in the Middle East, like there was presence in Syria, and being on par with the United States. These are very much part of the Soviet agenda. But then there are also this other elements coming from the Russian Empire. So does he want back Russian Empire? No. Does he want back the Soviet Union? No. But he wants Russia with some elements coming from both.
Thank you. I'm wondering, as Trump continues to pursue this neo-isolationist posture in Ukraine, how do we recover diplomatically going further as we try to retain our European allies and Ukraine if we continue along this path, choking USAID funding in Ukraine and, totally, how do we move forward?
25 words or less.
Well, what you said in terms of kind of neo-isolationism, this is indeed, that's the trend that existed in the United States for a long period of time. I think that this is, even if you look from the perspective of America first, is a huge mistake. Because one thing that is happening now is basically the possible scenarios of Gantz scenario, where it's Trump's decision to withdraw and then live into the next administration to deal with the consequences. So that can be The know-how is already there, so Ukraine can be another example of that. That is certainly bad news for U.S. on a number of levels. Europe already is actually trying to position itself certainly as an entity that is still closely related to the United States, but has to think on its own. Before this war started, Europe's position was, even from people in Poland, which were very pro-American, Radek Sikorski and others, basically, the idea was that, okay, don't tell us how we should behave ourselves with China. So Europe was trying to position itself as basically being on good terms with the United States and with China. So if China is the biggest concern, what is happening there is not good. Ukraine, if Ukraine falls again, I hope it doesn't happen. But if Ukraine falls again, that's another big plus to China. Or if Ukraine survives, but with the help of China, which is also another possibility. So it's a self-defeating strategy, even if you accept a particular point of view. How to deal with that? Well, we are still living in democracy, right? So exercising our democratic rights and talking to people. It's very simple, it's very difficult, and it's absolutely necessary.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments?
Thank you. So the biggest problem right now with signing the ceasefire from the Ukrainian side, that Ukraine is left without any security guarantees. And there is a big disillusionment with NATO, with all the Western partners in terms of providing any military support, any personnel support. And there are a couple of pretty influential opinion leaders in Ukraine stating the necessity of Ukraine developing nuclear weapons and generally kind of having those claims on the international arena as, self-reliance, that we only can protect ourselves with nuclear weapons. How realistic are those claims? Because I feel like people do share this sentiment, and I don't see how exactly those opinions leaders want that to be executed. Or are there any other ways we can get the security guarantees that Russia, should the ceasefire be signed, Russia doesn't reconsider in a month, in a year?
Sure. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, what is happening in Ukraine is a huge blow to the non-proliferation regime. So any politician, at least a little bit thinking ahead and responsible for her or his country, certainly lesson is right there. Either you have nukes, or the piece of paper on which the guarantees are there is basically worthless. Including NATO. NATO is very much depends on the basically American willingness to get engaged, and I don't know whether it is there anymore. So NATO is turning into another piece of paper. So the message is very clear: get the nukes. That's the only thing that can help you. So, and for Ukrainians to think in those terms would be the most natural thing, and that's why you hear those voices. Now, your question was whether it's realistic or not. I don't think that in current environment it is realistic unless Ukraine is prepared to become North Korea, which clearly this is not this is not the model that Ukrainians are dying for. So I don't think it's realistic. I think that the voices are there more like a part of the argument, talking to the West and to the United States in particular. Okay, you forced us to give up nuclear weapons. There's some responsibility that should come with that. And it looks like this argument is not particularly effective, at least today. So what is next? If there is a ceasefire, and the prestige of the President Trump really depends on this ceasefire holding for whatever period of time, and there is understanding that actually it will end at some point. The only guarantee that Ukraine has is actually to arm itself as and to keep army as battle ready as possible, to suggest that actually the continuation of the special military operation is not a good idea. So conventional weapons, that's the only guarantee, stronger than NATO, stronger than anything else. Again, for that you need support. Ukraine already developed its own base for producing drones and other things. So building more on that base, getting support from the allies, and being ready with conventional weapons. Because no other country, and that's another lesson from this war, there can be 1,000 promises. No other country will actually commit seriously into the war with another nuclear power unless that country's interests, core interests are at stake. Right? That's was part of this war, of why Ukrainians were not getting the weapons that they needed. Because the idea was that there are these red lines in the mind of Putin, the Crimea, the this and that, and then he would use nuclear weapons. That was not Ukrainian thinking. They went into the Russian Federation without American administration knowing about that or approving that. But again, the position is, if you are dealing with a nuclear power, you have to count first and foremost on yourself. No promises, no commitments to support democracy or anything else would work, because they would hit the wall of a potential nuclear war. Was it Vance or whoever was telling Zelensky that you're bringing us into the Third World War, right?
It was Trump.
Oh, it was Trump. Okay, so that's basically verbalization of the very same idea. So yeah, conventional weapons and make it as costly as possible. That's the only chance for Ukraine to survive.
Yes?
I just want to quickly ask a couple of big questions. First of all, you talked about a ceasefire on Russian terms, and if you could just articulate that for the audience. And the other is, I guess I have this dream, if all of Europe sent ground troops to Ukraine, things would change. That's just a dream, isn't it?
That probably would happen if Ukraine would be at war with a non-nuclear superpower. But Ukraine is at war with nuclear superpower, so that's again, there can be conditions, there can be this and that, but yeah, that's unlikely. And the question.
Just the Russian terms.
Well, the Russian terms. Well, what is there in the media? Sanctions are lifted. The line of the wherever the war ends probably would be there, with Ukraine being left without actual support, and the Russian demands at Istanbul was also reducing the number of the army, no supplies from the. So NATO is now not even being discussed. So the idea is that weakened Ukraine, Russia with lifted sanctions, which actually will be able to rearm itself much faster than Ukraine would be able to provide, get defensive weapons. So that's the most nightmarish scenario at this point. And the last few months taught me that when you imagine the most nightmarish scenario, the actual nightmarish scenario can be even worse.
Oh, boy, what a way to end the evening. Oh, do you have one question? Maybe the last question. Is it something upbeat?
Unfortunately.
Sorry.
First of all, thank you. I just had a quick clarification question. So you were talking about the ceasefire on Russian terms, and we know that Russia has claimed 4 oblasts which they don't fully occupy. So can you talk about like potential, like how that could go in negotiations and what could potentially happen with the unoccupied parts in negotiations?
Yeah, that means that basically the current front line can't be used as the basis for the peace that both sides would agree on, and probably that would be used as an argument in the negotiations. But I can't imagine actually President Trump celebrating victory and peace if basically Ukraine would have to move the front line further west or further north or something like that. So if that happens on the front line, okay, that will happen, but I don't think that actually you can spin the ceasefire like that as a big Nobel Prize quality victory. Yeah, in terms of me being very, very grim and pessimistic, well, Ukraine is actually there is a hope. The country is fighting now, the cost is enormous. But if you fight back, you have a chance to survive. If you don't fight back, you are done. So let's all fight back in our own way, with our own problems, with our own issues, and we all have them, some global, some local. But that's a positive lesson from what is there.
That's upbeat. Thank you so much for that.